Well, as the attorney for the defendant, Taylor Schabusiness, I'd like to share with you that I believe this case is a puzzling, unclear, confusing, and bizarre set of facts. It is unknown what really happened between February 22nd of 2022 and February 23rd of 2022. What we do know in this case is that numerous law enforcement officers testified. We had detectives, we had police officers, we had Dr. Tranquita, and DNA experts, forensic specialists, lots of different people, some citizen witnesses. I'd ask that you consider setting aside your emotions and decide this case based on the facts that have been presented. You've sat here for the last 3 days. You've been here in court. I know that you've listened very closely, but don't assume anything. When you deliberate about all of the facts. What we do know is that law enforcement officers on February 23rd of 2022 went to 829 Stony Brook Lane in Green Bay, this small Cape Cod home, and made contact with the occupants, Tara Pakinich, Stephen Hendricks, and Ava Wheelock was woken up, but they were all sitting at the kitchen table, and officers came in to see what was going on. There was a concern, obviously, that there was a bucket down at the end of the stairs. And we heard from Detective Groff that this was an ongoing investigation, law enforcement. They were trying to piece this together. It was an unusual situation, and so they were trying to find out what happened. Unfortunately, I believe it was Officer Plonky and Officer Wanish. They testified. They came here and indicated that they went down to check out what was in the basement, and there was a head. It was the head of Shad Thyrion in that black Fleet Farm bucket. And the investigation continued on. But what I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that there really are no eyewitnesses as to what really happened down in the basement. There is no Taylor Schabusiness there, no other people there, and so that'll be something that you'll have to consider and think about. Then law enforcement realized that there was a secondary scene, and that was at 2353 Eastman Avenue, apartment 1 of that parking lot. And you saw the video. The officers, I think it was Officer Garth Russell, and a couple of other ones, they were walked up. Microphone. Thank you. The officers walked up, and they parked a distance away, and they walked up in the snow, and they saw a line of cars in front of the apartment complex. And they saw that a minivan. It was a gold Town and Country Chrysler minivan, and that was a vehicle of concern. Had some snow on the back windshield. There were vehicles on either side. And the officers walked up, and they they saw some lights on the van, and then they saw someone come out the front door, and it was my client. It was Taylor Schabusiness. At that point, she was arrested by Officer Russell, and another officer then realized there was a male inside of the apartment number 1 down the hall. Ended up being Scott Tomes, and he was told to lay on the ground and held at gunpoint, and then he was arrested. So 2 people were taken from the apartment building and taken down to the police station. There was a search of the Eastman Avenue apartment. We don't have any body parts there. I would submit that there really wasn't anything of evidentiary value there. And that was that. Later on, officers and detectives realized that minivan was something that they were concerned about, so that was taken down to the police storage garage. And then we found out that from Dr. Tranquita and some of the other forensic specialists, Andre, I believe it was investigator Andre, and Zarnecki. And so they donned Tyvek gear, protective PPE equipment, and they methodically investigated the back of the minivan, and they found the crock pot box that was in a laundry basket sitting on a seat, and there were human remains in there. Nobody saw Taylor Schabusiness driving this minivan. So these are some of the facts that you got to think about. Don't rush to judgment, but talk about it, analyze it. As jurors, you have to analyze the facts that you hear, and you have to apply the law that the judge gives you. It's a daunting task. So then we hear, you saw the video, the interview between Detective Groff and my client, Taylor Schabusiness. She was taken down to the Green Bay Police Department. Photographs were taken of her, and clothes were taken, and she was put in a yellow suit and then later a blue suit, but she was asked questions. And you got to remember what she said and what questions were being asked. She did say during the interview, "I can't think right now. I'm effing nuts." She said that she was up all night, that the body would rebuild itself. She said weird, odd things. Consider her credibility. Consider what she says. Consider what she said to Detective Groff or Detective Scanlon. She said stuff, I would submit that she said things that didn't make sense. She says, I have no idea to some of the questions that the detectives asked her. You remember seeing the video on the screen. I'd ask that you recall that she had inappropriate laughs, inappropriate smiling, odd responses. I would submit that she indicated that she did not have sex. She did not have penis-to-vagina intercourse with Shad Thyrion. She indicated that she came to the residence and they went downstairs, and within 5 minutes they got to it, whatever that means. She talked about, during the interview with Detective Groff, rebuilding muscle or rebuilding into muscle. Sometimes she wasn't responsive. She talked about hearing gunshots, but I believe Detective Groff said that there were no gunshots in the area of Stony Brook, Eastman Avenue, was some other place. She said she was paranoid. She said weird things like, I don't like open spaces. I don't like open spaces. No clothes came off. No kissing. She said that she allegedly put the dildo into Mr. Thyrion's backside, his butt area, his anal area. There's no DNA. We heard from Kevin Scott, DNA expert. He must have done real well in school, in chemistry and all that. But the swab from the dildo, item J1, it says the possible contribution of DNA from Shad Thyrion is inconclusive due to the complexity of the mixture. I would argue that his DNA is not on the dildo. So I would argue that even though the state is charging out third-degree sexual assault, there is no shred of evidence to support that particular charge. And I'd ask that you take that into account. No evidence at the Eastman Avenue apartment, When Detective Groff had my client come down to the Green Bay Police Department with Detective Kevin Kempf, they were talking with her for a while. The interview was maybe 3 hours or so, and then they took a break because Ms. Schabusiness had cuts on her thumb, scratches on her palms, other cuts on her fingers. Some of them were deep. You saw the pictures because I believe they were published. And she was taken over to St. Vincent's Hospital for medical evaluation. I would submit that the blood on her hands may have been her own because of the deep cuts that she had suffered, or that she had. The defense had subpoenaed Mr. Scott Tomes. He was unavailable, and he gave an account of that night. And he had indicated, at least on Monday night, that would have been February 21st, that Taylor Schabusiness and her friend Shad came over. He had seen Shad before, but didn't know his name. Then he thought that they hooked up to do meth. And then he talked about his vehicle. And he talked about that Taylor Schabusiness had used his vehicle in the past and didn't get permission on that particular night. Then he indicated that he was drinking. And then he indicated that Taylor Schabusiness returned to his house around midnight with his vehicle, went to her bedroom, and he had a suspicion that she may have been high on drugs. And then he had indicated that Taylor had the bedroom and that he would sleep in his chair. So that's, something else that you have to think about. We heard from Lieutenant Buckman. He was a veteran on the Green Bay Police Department, and that he was doing some investigating, and he wasn't sure if Taylor Schabusiness was a suspect or a victim because it was an ongoing new investigation. So that's something you have to take into account as well. The state brought up some photographs, a picture of Taylor with her phone, and young girls, I submit, they like their phones. So do all kids, young people. They like their phones, and they look up things on the internet for a variety of different reasons: shock value, curiosity. But we have a situation here where Taylor did do some searches about Jeffrey Dahmer. I would submit that that's a ruse. that doesn't necessarily mean anything, and that people search the internet for all kinds of things on the internet, and that it's for shock value. So that shouldn't really play any part in this case. I would ask that you discount that and set that aside. Now, I would argue that I would argue that it's not a clear case here. Was this an accidental death? Did Taylor Schabusiness kill Shad Thyrion? Was there intent to kill Shad Thyrion? Did Taylor Schabusiness have the mental purpose to kill Shad Thyrion? Different theories, different things for you to think about. You are all like analysts, and you have to assess and decipher the facts. The facts here are very complicated, confusing, unclear. 2 different locations, no eyewitnesses. Taylor Schabusiness, we learned that she went to school with Shad Thyrion, middle school, Bayport High School. They were friends. They hung out. You heard from A.J. Gannon. He hung out with them as well. Can you trust what someone says when they're hopped up on meth, on drugs? The state wants you to look into Taylor Schabusiness's mind to find out what her intent was. And that's a difficult task. Did she have a clear mind on February 22nd of 2022 as to what was really going on? Accidents can happen. When accidents happen, people can make other choices in a panic. Something for you to think about. This sexual assault charge, how can you have sexual intercourse with the facts that have been laid out and presented to you? It's mind-boggling. How can you have sex when genitals are in one place and body's in a different place? It's foggy, it's cloudy. It's hard to imagine, almost impossible to try and figure out what did or didn't happen. I would submit to you that no sexual assault occurred. I'd ask that you find her not guilty of third-degree sexual assault. You can't rely on everything Taylor Schabusiness says. Think about that, please. She chose not to testify under our Constitution of the United States of America. She doesn't have to testify. That's what the law provides. You don't have to take the witness stand. You have a right to remain silent, and you can't use that fact alone against her. I would argue that based on all of the evidence and the testimony in this case, that you find my client not guilty of all the charges. Thank you very much for your time.